Okay, let's dive in. We're looking at, what, 3,000 years of history here?
Pretty much, yeah. 3 millennia of civilization building in the subcontinent.
From these incredibly ancient cities, with sanitation that apparently puts early Rome to shame.
Right, all the way to the rise of these huge empires and, well, philosophies that literally changed the world.
So this is really about finding the blueprint, the foundations of South Asian history.
Exactly. But it's more than just a history lesson, I think. Our goal today, for you listening, is to sort of get the essential pivots.
The key turning points.
Yeah, the turning points. Not just what happened, but understanding how these big shifts, like in city planning or these major philosophical breakthroughs, or even just cultures mashing together, how all that created the world we see around 1 CE.
So we're talking political science, philosophy.
Big transformations right at their source. Foundational stuff.
Okay, so let's start way back. Picture the world, maybe 2500 BCE. You've got Egypt, you've got Mesopotamia, the usual suspects.
Right, the big players.
But then there's this other massive civilization, the Indus Valley Civilization, the IVC, huge area, sophisticated cities, Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa. What always gets me is the sheer order of those places.
That order is, well, it's probably the single most striking thing. It wasn't just towns growing randomly.
No.
This was planning. A real revolution in urban design for its time. We're talking cities laid out on a precise rectangular grid. Main streets, perfectly north-south, east-west.
Across that whole huge area.
Yeah, that kind of uniformity, it just screams powerful, centralized control. Someone had to be enforcing that standard.
And it went right down to the basics, like the bricks they used.
Standardized, fire-baked bricks, multi-story houses built around these private courtyards. And I love this detail, too.
With doors and windows.
Yeah. They opened onto the side lanes, not the main streets, which tells you something about maybe privacy, noise reduction, a real focus on livability.
It's quite a contrast to other places. But the public works. That's maybe the most mind-blowing part.
Oh, absolutely. Their infrastructure. That's what was genuinely, unmatched anywhere else in the Bronze Age.
Red drainage some.
Advanced, covered drainage systems connected to individual houses. Many homes apparently had their own private tiled bathrooms, even their own wells.
That focus on public health, on sanitation.
It was just way ahead of its time. Globally unprecedented.
So different from Egypt, say, with its huge pyramids, tombs for god kings, or Mesopotamia with the giant temples, the ziggurats
Right.
in the IVC, Mohenjo-Daro. What's the biggest, most prominent public building they've found?
It's the granary, the Great Granary.
Which tells you what?
Well, it suggests their power, their state legitimacy, maybe wasn't built on grand religious monuments in the same way. It seems rooted in something more practical.
Well, managing resources.
Exactly. Collecting and redistributing grain, keeping civic order, just sheer administrative efficiency. It points towards a potentially more, dare I say, secular model of governance compared to its contemporaries.
Although they did have things like the Great Bath.
True, true. Likely for ritual purification, so religion was definitely present. But the emphasis seems different.
Okay, so this incredibly advanced civilization, what happened to it? For ages, everyone talked about the Aryan invasion.
Right, the old theory. Which, we should be clear, is now pretty much academically discredited.
Okay, so what's the current thinking?
The consensus now is very different. The decline, starting maybe around 1900 BCE, wasn't some sudden violent takeover. It looks like a climate-driven process.
Climate change back then?
Yeah. Specifically, the summer monsoons, the ones that fed their whole agricultural system, the flood-based farming, they gradually dried up, weakened over generations.
Ah, so the water source failed.
Making it impossible to sustain those huge cities, that dense urban population.
So it wasn't a collapse into nothingness. They didn't just vanish.
Not at all. It looks more like a strategic shift, a strategic deurbanization, you could call it.
Meaning?
The population didn't disappear. They adapted. They moved mostly eastward into smaller villages, often in the Himalayan foothills, because those areas relied more on the winter monsoons, which remained more reliable. So it's really a story of resilience, of climate adaptation, not just destruction.
Okay, so the big cities fade, people move east, and a new kind of society emerges, the Vedic Age. The earliest text we have is the Rig Veda, right? Around 1500 to 1000 BCE.
That's the one. And it paints a picture of a very different world, much more pastoral, semi-nomadic.
Simpler, almost.
In some ways. Wealth wasn't about land, it was measured in cattle. Politically, it was surprisingly participatory.
How so?
They had chieftains, rajans, but they were often elected, or at least acclaimed. And they had to answer to these powerful tribal assemblies, the Saba, kind of a council of elders, and the Samiti, the broader assembly of the people.
So power was more distributed.
Definitely. The people had a real voice. And socially, too, things were different. The Varna system, the class system.
It existed, but it was more fluid.
Much more flexible early on, based more on what you did, your profession, rather than who you were born to. There seems to have been social mobility. And women, interestingly, appear to have had, well, a greater degree of freedom, even participating in debates.
Oh, but that changed dramatically.
It did. This is the Great Transformation, roughly 1000 to 600 BCE. And the driver, again, seems to be economic.
What was it this time?
The big shift to settled agriculture. And what enabled that shift on a large scale was the widespread adoption of iron tools.
Iron. Stronger tools.
Iron axes to clear the really dense forests of the Gangetic Plain. Iron plows to cultivate the land more effectively. This created a reliable agricultural surplus.
And surplus changes everything.
Always does. Suddenly you need stable, long-term leadership to manage that surplus, protect the land. That need basically killed off the old participatory system.
Leading to
The rise of hereditary kings. Monarchs who passed power down to their sons. The assemblies, the Saba and Samiti, lost their influence, became rubber stamps, or just vanished.
And the social structure, the Varna system.
It solidified, became rigid, based firmly on birth. Land ownership became paramount. And this is where we see the emergence of the Shudras as a distinct fourth class, defined by service.
And the status of women.
Also declined sharply. They were increasingly confined to domestic roles, seen as subordinate, a major shift from the earlier Vedic period.
And this new rigid social order got a kind of divine backing, didn't it? Through a specific text.
Yes, the Purusha Sukta hymn. It's considered a later addition to the Rig Veda, but it became hugely influential. It describes a cosmic sacrifice of a primordial being, Purusha.
And the classes emerged from his body parts.
Exactly. Brahmins, the priests, from the mouth. Kshatriyas, the warriors and rulers, from the arms. Vaishyas, the farmers and merchants, from the legs or thighs. And Shudras, the laborers and servants, from the feet.
Wow. Talk about building the hierarchy right into the fabric of reality.
And it also established the concept of the Dvija, the twice-born.
Which applied only to the top three.
Right. Brahmins, Kshatriyas, Vaishyas underwent a symbolic second birth through initiation ceremonies, giving them access to Vedic learning and rituals. The Shudras were excluded. A fundamental social and religious division was cemented.
Okay, let's circle back to the people who brought this Vedic culture. We've established the old Aryan invasion theory is out. You mentioned Mortimer Wheeler's evidence about a massacre at Mohenjo-Daro.
Yeah, that's been thoroughly debunked. The skeletons weren't all from the same time period. No signs of a single violent event matching the timeline. The whole invasion narrative just doesn't hold up archaeologically or chronologically.
So if it wasn't a military invasion wiping out the IVC, what's the accepted model now?
The overwhelming consensus among scholars today supports the Indo-Aryan migration IAM model.
Migration, not invasion.
Exactly. Think of it as a much slower, multi-generational process, a diffusion of people and, crucially, language.
Okay, diffusion from where?
The linguistic and genetic evidence points strongly towards a homeland for the Proto-Indo-European PIE language family, somewhere on the Pontic-Caspian steppe, the region north of the Black and Caspian Seas.
So people speaking early forms of Indo-Aryan languages gradually moved out from there.
In waves, over centuries. It wasn't one single event. And it was more about cultural interaction and gradual assimilation than outright conquest of existing populations.
What's the evidence backing this migration into India rather than, say, an origin within India? Some people propose that, right? The out-of-India theory.
Yes, the OIT exists, and it often points to cultural continuity within India. However, the mainstream view finds the evidence for migration into India much more compelling, based on a kind of triad of evidence.
Okay, what's the first pillar?
Linguistics. The simple fact that Sanskrit, the language of the Vedas, clearly belongs to the Indo-European family. It shares systematic similarities and a common ancestry with Old Persian, Greek, Latin, Germanic languages, Slavic languages, you name it.
Meaning it must have come from that common PIE source outside India?
Exactly. It strongly suggests that Indo-Aryan languages are intrusive to the subcontinent, not native.
Okay, pillar 2.
Genetics. Large-scale studies of ancient and modern DNA have consistently shown genetic markers associated with steppe pastoralist populations entering South Asia, particularly northern India, in multiple waves during the Bronze Age, roughly aligning with the time frame for the migrations. We're talking specific Y chromosome haplogroups like R1A.
And the third pillar, archaeology.
Archaeology helps trace the path. We see cultural connections, pottery styles, burial practices, chariot technology linking the steppe, like the Sintashta culture, through Central Asia, the Andronova culture, towards South Asia.
And there was a key interaction in Central Asia.
A really important one. Before entering the subcontinent proper, these Indo-Aryan-speaking groups interacted significantly with the existing sophisticated urban civilization in Central Asia, the Bactria-Margiana Archaeological Complex, or BMAC.
So they didn't arrive as simple nomads.
No. They likely absorbed elements of culture, technology, maybe even religious ideas from the BMAC. They arrived in India as part of a hybrid culture, already influenced by settled urban societies.
So, summing up, invasion theory largely discredited, out of India theory a minority view. The dominant model is slow, multi-wave migration and diffusion, supported by linguistics, genetics, and archaeology.
That's the current state of play in mainstream scholarship, yes. The interaction and fusion aspect is key.
All right, so we have this evolving Vedic society. The next huge shift, maybe the most profound, isn't political or economic, but philosophical.
Internal.
Deeply internal. We see a move away from the focus of the early Vedas, which was largely on external rituals, sacrifices to gods like Indra for rain, Agni for fire, pleasing powerful external forces, towards introspection, towards understanding the ultimate nature of reality and the self. This happens in the text known as the Upanishads,
which are also called Vedanta. Yes, Vedanta literally means the end of the Veda. Not necessarily the termination, but the culmination, the ultimate purpose or essence of the Vedic knowledge. It marks a shift in emphasis from karma, understood here as ritual action, towards jnana, deep, experiential knowledge or wisdom.
Okay, this sounds big. What's the core idea, the absolute central teaching?
It revolves around two key concepts, Brahman and Atman.
Define those for us.
Brahman is the ultimate reality. Not a personal God, but the single, unchanging, infinite, impersonal, cosmic principle or consciousness underlying everything. It's so beyond conception that it's often described negatively. Neti, not this, not that.
Okay. And Atman?
Atman is the individual self, the soul, the innermost essence of a living being.
And the great insight, the revolutionary idea of the Upanishads,
is that the Atman is Brahman. Your individual essence is identical to the ultimate cosmic essence. Deep down, you are that ultimate reality you've just forgotten or haven't realized it.
That's huge. Is there a famous phrase for that?
The most famous is probably Tattavamasi, usually translated as that thou art or you are that. It encapsulates that fundamental identity between the individual self and the ultimate reality.
So realizing this identity is the goal.
That's the path to liberation, yes.
Yeah.
But understanding why we need liberation requires grasping a few other key concepts that really come into focus here.
Right, the mechanics of it all.
The essential triad. Karma, samsara, and moksha.
Okay, break those down. Karma.
Not just ritual action anymore, but the universal moral law of cause and effect. Every action, thought, intent has consequences that shape your future experiences, lifetime after lifetime.
Which leads to samsara.
Exactly. Samsara is the cycle, the endless wheel of birth, death, and rebirth driven by your karma. You're trapped in this cycle due to ignorance of your true nature, Atman or Brahman, and the desires and actions that generate more karma.
And moksha?
Moksha is the escape, liberation, freedom from the cycle of samsara. It's achieved through that profound realization, the direct experiential knowledge of the identity between Atman and Brahman. That realization effectively burns up the seeds of karma.
So these Upanishadic ideas, they become part of the sacred literature. How did they categorize these texts?
They drew a distinction. There's Shruti, meaning that which is heard. This is considered divine revelation, authorless, timeless truth. It includes the four Vedas themselves, and crucially, the Upanishads are classified as Shruti, the highest authority.
And the other category?
Smriti, meaning that which is remembered. These are considered human-composed texts, derived from or elaborating on Shruti. Still sacred and important, but secondary in authority. This includes things like the great epics, Mahabharata, Ramayana, the Puranas, the law books, Dharmashastras.
It sounds like the Upanishads were almost a reform movement, maybe? A challenge from within the system?
That's a great way to put it, a protest from within. It didn't reject the Vedas outright, but it reinterpreted their ultimate meaning, shifting the focus from external ritual performed by priests to internal realization accessible to dedicated seekers. Prioritizing jnana over karma was perhaps also a way for the Brahmanical tradition to evolve and respond to. Well, new spiritual competition that was emerging.
Ah, okay. So new spiritual competition. What was driving that?
Economics,
Yeah.
again, in large part. That Iron Revolution we talked about really kicked into high gear. By around 600 BCE, it fueled what historians call the second urbanization.
Back to cities again, but this time in the Gangetic Plains.
Exactly. Iron tools meant massive agricultural surpluses, which supported larger populations, new towns and cities springing up, increased trade. We even see the first widespread use of currency punch-marked coins, and the rise of powerful guilds of merchants and artisans.
So a more complex, wealthy society. But we also talked about how the Varna system had become rigid by this point. Did that create tension?
Huge tension. You had this new urban environment, lots of social mixing, but overlaid with this strict birth-based hierarchy. It created a lot of suffering, a sense of dislocation for many. Think about the Vaishya class, the merchants. They might be becoming very wealthy through trade.
But they still ranked below the priests, Brahmins, and warriors, Kshatriyas, in terms of social status and religious privilege.
Precisely. They had economic power but lacked corresponding social prestige within the traditional Vedic framework. This created an audience receptive to new ideas.
And this is where the Shramana come in.
Yes, the Shramana movement. These were wandering ascetics, philosophers, seekers. That's what Shramana means. And crucially, they operated outside the Brahmanical mainstream. They rejected the authority of the Vedas and the hereditary priesthood.
What did they emphasize instead?
Personal effort, meditation, ethical conduct, philosophical inquiry. They sought liberation through their own discipline and insight, not through Vedic rituals performed by Brahmins. It was a very different path.
And two major world religions emerged from this Shramana milieu, right? Jainism and Buddhism.
The most prominent ones, yes. Let's take Jainism first. Associated with Mahavira, considered the 24th Tirthankara, or great teacher in their tradition.
What are the key Jain ideas?
A distinct view of karma. They see it almost as a subtle physical substance, like fine particles that cling to the soul, jiva, due to our actions and passions, weighing it down in samsara. Liberation involves stopping the influx of new karma and shedding the old through rigorous asceticism and, most famously, the principle of ahimsa nonviolence, taken to an extreme degree, encompassing non-harm to all living beings, even microscopic ones. They also emphasize anekantavada, the idea of many-sidedness, acknowledging the complexity of reality and the partiality of any single viewpoint.
Okay. And Buddhism, founded by Siddhartha Gautama, the Buddha,
who famously advocated the middle way. He'd experienced the extremes of palace luxury and harsh asceticism and rejected both as paths to enlightenment.
His core teaching is often summarized as
the Four Noble Truths. 1. Life inevitably involves suffering or dissatisfaction, dukkha. 2. The cause of this suffering is craving, attachment, desire, tanha. 3. Suffering can cease. This cessation is nirvana. 4. The way to achieve this cessation is the Eightfold Path. Right understanding, right thought, right speech, etc.
And a key philosophical difference from the Upanishads.
The concept of anatta, or no self. Unlike the Upanishadic idea of an eternal, unchanging Atman, the Buddha taught that there is no permanent, independent self or soul. What we perceive as self is just a temporary collection of changing physical and mental components. Realizing this emptiness is key to liberation.
It's really interesting that both Mahavira and the Buddha came from not the big monarchies that were rising, but the smaller republic.
That's a critical point. They both hailed from the republican states, Ganasangas, that still existed, particularly in the Himalayan foothills. These states had more participatory, less autocratic forms of government compared to the big kingdoms emerging in the plains.
And that influenced their teachings.
It seems reflected in their philosophies, challenging hereditary authority, like the Brahmin priesthood, emphasizing individual effort. And it's explicitly reflected in the organization of the Buddhist monastic community, the Sangha.
How so?
The Buddha deliberately modeled the Sangha structure and rules on the governing principles of the republics, emphasizing communal decision-making, rules agreed upon by consensus, less hierarchical structures. It was inherently anti-Varna, anti-caste, which, along with its rational approach, really appealed to those disenfranchised groups, especially the newly wealthy but socially restricted merchant class. They became major patrons.
Okay, so we have these rising kingdoms, republics, new philosophies swirling around. This ferment eventually leads to the first great pan-Indian empire, right? The Mauryans.
Yes, founded around 322 BCE by Chandragupta Maurya. He rose in the power vacuum left after Alexander the Great's brief invasion and withdrawal from the northwest.
And he had a famous advisor, a strategist.
His mentor, the Brahmin Chanakya, also known as Kautilya, a legendary figure, often credited with masterminding Chandragupta's rise and the unification of northern India.
And Kautilya is associated with a very specific, very influential book on statecraft.
The Arthashastra, literally the science of material gain, or science of polity. It's remarkable, a completely pragmatic, often ruthless political manual.
How so? What's its focus?
Purely on how a king should acquire and maintain power. It covers administration, law, foreign policy, espionage, economic management, even military strategy. There's very little idealism. It's all about practical effectiveness, often compared to Machiavelli's The Prince, though much earlier and broader in scope.
Cold, calculated realism.
Entirely. It even outlines the Septanga theory, the 7 limbs or constituents of the state, the king, ministers' territory, forts, treasury, army, and allies, analyzing how each contributes to state power.
So Chandragupta builds this powerful, efficient, maybe somewhat ruthless state based on these principles. Then comes his grandson, Ashoka.
Ashoka the Great. He inherits this formidable empire around 268 BCE and initially continues the expansionist policy until one specific brutal war.
The Kalinga War, around 261 BCE.
Yes, Kalinga on the east coast was one of the last major independent regions. The Mauryan conquest was successful but incredibly bloody. Ashoka himself recorded his reaction in his inscriptions,
In the Rock Edicts.
particularly Rock Edict 13. He speaks of the immense suffering caused hundreds of thousands killed, deported, or dying from the aftermath. He expresses profound remorse and a fundamental change of heart.
A genuine pivot.
It seems so. This experience apparently led him to embrace Buddhist principles, particularly nonviolence, and radically changed his imperial policy. He renounced aggressive warfare.
Replacing military conquest.
Digvijaya, conquest by arms, with Dhammavijaya, conquest by righteousness or moral principle.
Now, this Dhamma that Ashoka promoted, was it just Buddhism? Was he making Buddhism the state religion?
That's a common misconception. While Ashoka personally embraced Buddhism and patronized it heavily, his public inscriptions promoting Dhamma describe something broader.
Like a universal code of conduct.
Exactly, a universal moral ethic suitable for his incredibly diverse empire. It emphasized nonviolence, ahimsa, respect for elders and teachers, kindness to servants and animals, generosity, and crucially, religious tolerance. He explicitly calls for respect between different sects.
And social welfare, too.
Yes, he mentions establishing medical facilities for humans and animals, planting roadside trees, digging wells, practical measures for public good, framed within this moral code of Dhamma.
How did he get this message out across such a vast, multilingual empire?
This is where his genius for communication comes in. He had his edicts carved on rocks and pillars throughout the empire, placed in public, accessible locations.
Not just in palaces.
No, for the people to see. And crucially, he didn't just use one imperial language. He used local scripts and languages, predominantly Prakrit dialects written in Brahmi script, but in the northwest,
where there were populations influenced by Alexander's campaigns and earlier Persian rule.
He used Greek and Aramaic. Inscriptions have been found in both languages. He was speaking directly to all his subjects in languages they understood.
That's incredible political communication.
Absolutely. And he created a new class of officials, the Dhamma Mahamadas, whose job was specifically to promote Dhamma, oversee charitable works, and ensure fair treatment and welfare across the diverse communities of the empire. It was a unique attempt to rule a superstate through moral persuasion and efficient multilingual administration.
But even Ashoka's empire didn't last forever. It started fragmenting after his death around 185 BCE.
Yes, the Mauryan Empire eventually collapsed, leading to a period of political fragmentation. Powerful regional dynasties emerged, like the Satavahanas, who controlled a large empire in the Deccan Plateau for centuries.
Then the Northwest became a bit chaotic.
A revolving door is a good way to put it. A succession of groups from Central Asia moved in, establishing kingdoms. First the Indo-Greeks, successors to Alexander's generals.
Then Indo-Scythians, or Sakas.
Then Indo-Parthians. It was a dynamic, sometimes turbulent period in that region.
Until another major Central Asian power consolidated control.
Right. Around the middle of the 1st century CE, starting around 30 CE, we see the rise of the Kushan Empire. Originally nomadic people from the borders of China, they moved west and south.
And they created something quite special.
A truly syncretic empire. They straddled Central Asia and northern India, embracing multiple cultures, languages, and religions. And crucially, their location gave them control over the absolute nexus of international trade.
The Silk Road.
The overland Silk Road routes connecting China to the west, and the increasingly important maritime trade routes connecting India to the Roman Empire via the Red Sea. The Kushans sat right in the middle, controlling and taxing this immense flow of goods.
Making them incredibly wealthy.
Fabulously wealthy. Their gold coinage, imitating Roman designs but with their own rulers and deities, attests to this.
And this crossroads position led to amazing cultural fusion, especially in art. You mentioned Gandhara earlier.
Yes, the Gandhara region, modern-day Pakistan and Afghanistan, was a heartland of the Kushan Empire, and before them, the Indo-Greeks. This is where we see a remarkable blending of Indian subjects, particularly Buddhist ones, with Greco-Roman artistic styles.
And this is where the Buddha finally gets a face.
It's where the first widespread anthropomorphic images of the Buddha appear. Before this, in early Buddhist art, the Buddha himself was generally represented aniconically by symbols like an empty throne, a Bodhi tree, footprints, or a wheel.
Why'd that change?
The influence of the Greek cult of form, their tradition of realistic human sculpture, seems to have been key. Patrons and artists in Gandhara began depicting the Buddha in human form, often with features reminiscent of Greek gods like Apollo wavy hair, toga-like robes, the monastic Sangati, a realistic, serene human presence.
And this new imagery helped Buddhism spread.
Dramatically. These relatable human images were incredibly powerful devotional objects and teaching tools. They likely played a huge role in the popularization and spread of Mahayana Buddhism, which was also developing around this time, across Central Asia and into East Asia along those very trade routes the Kushans controlled.
Let's talk more about that trade, the Indo-Roman connection. How significant was it?
Immensely significant. By the 1st century CE, sailors had mastered the monsoon winds of the Indian Ocean, allowing for direct, large-scale maritime trade between Roman Egypt and Indian ports.
What was India exporting?
High-value luxury goods that Rome craved. Spices, pepper was huge precious stones, pearls, fine textiles like cottons and silks, some possibly re-exported from China, exotic animals, timber.
And what did Rome send back?
Some glassware, wine, maybe metals. But overwhelmingly, Rome paid in money. Gold and silver coin. Hordes of Roman coins are found all over India.
Which led to that famous complaint from Pliny the Elder.
Right. The Roman writer Pliny, in the 1st century CE, lamented that India was draining the Roman Empire of, he estimated, something like 100 million sesterces every single year.
Wow. Why?
Mostly, he grumbled, to pay for luxuries like pearls and silks to pamper Roman wives. Whether that was the main reason or not, it vividly illustrates the massive trade imbalance and the economic power the Indian subcontinent wielded through this global trade network around 1 CE.
So, if we stand back and look at the subcontinent at the dawn of the Common Era, 1 CE, what's the overall picture?
It's a vibrant mosaic. I think that's a good description. Politically fragmented in places, but economically interconnected, culturally dynamic. You have these major indigenous religious and philosophical traditions. Hinduism, evolving from the Vedic Upanishadic roots, Buddhism, Jainism, all coexisting, sometimes competing, fiercely debating their differences.
Like the nature of the self, Atman versus Anatta.
Exactly. Big philosophical differences. But beneath the surface debates, they shared a kind of common spiritual DNA, a shared vocabulary and understanding of the fundamental mechanics of the universe.
Karma, samsara, moksha.
Right. They might disagree profoundly on the details of the path or the ultimate nature of reality, but they largely agreed on the basic operating system. That actions have consequences across lifetimes, that we're caught in a cycle of rebirth, and that the ultimate goal is liberation from that cycle. That shared framework is a huge part of the legacy leading into the Common Era. Hashtag outro.
Wow. Okay, we have covered a lot of ground there. From, Indus Valley sanitation systems that sound better than ancient Rome.
Right. Amazing stuff.
To the cold political realism of the Arthashastra, Ashoka's moral revolution, the birth of the Buddha image, philosophies that shaped and still shape billions of lives, all in roughly 3,000 years. It's kind of staggering.
It really is. And maybe, a final thought to leave you with, something that emerges from looking at this long history.
Go on.
It's how profound world-altering change often seems to be driven by these slow, cumulative processes, sometimes with factors that seem quite distant at first. We talked about the decline of the most sophisticated Bronze Age civilization on Earth.
The Ivy.
Yeah. And the current thinking is that a primary driver was a subtle, gradual, multi-generational shift in the pattern of the summer monsoon rains, a climatic factor. So if something like that could fundamentally alter the course of civilization back then, it makes you wonder, doesn't it? What foundational environmental conditions, or maybe slow social or technological shifts, might be quietly, almost invisibly, shaping our political and social future right now.
That is definitely something to mull over. A really interesting perspective. Well, thank you for sharing all that source material and walking us through it. And thank you, everyone, for joining us on this deep dive.